pride, before the fall, Zexhai Vorthack stood 7 feet tall, and knew it. His crystalline blue scales caught the artificial sunlight streaming through the Intergalactic Defense Academy's main corridor, casting prismatic patterns across the polished metal floors. Every step he took resonated with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem his natural advantages couldn't solve. As a third-generation Calarian warrior, strength flowed through his genetic code like electricity through copper wire. The Academy buzzed with its usual morning chaos. Dozens of species from across the known galaxy hurried between classes, their conversations creating a symphony of clicks, chirps, harmonics, and traditional spoken languages. Zexhai moved through this diversity like a predator through tall grass, his massive frame commanding respect and creating a natural path wherever he walked. Other cadets instinctively stepped aside, recognizing the inherent authority that came with being one of the galaxy's apex warrior races. His dorm mate, Quill Tech, scurried alongside him on 6 legs, struggling to match Zexhai's casual pace. The insectoid Zephyrian barely reached Zexhai's waist, but his rapid speech patterns indicated excitement about something. "You should see the new instructor assignments," Quill Tech chittered, his antennae vibrating with nervous energy. "They've assigned more humans to advanced combat courses. Can you believe it?" Zexhai's laugh rumbled like distant thunder. "Humans? Those pale, soft creatures? What could they possibly teach us about combat?" He flexed his arm unconsciously, the movement causing his uniform to strain against muscles that could crush most materials with casual effort. "I've seen them in the Academy halls. They look like they'd break if you breathed on them too hard." The dismissal came naturally to him. Calarian culture had dominated 3 star systems through superior physical prowess and tactical brilliance. Their warriors were legendary across the galaxy, their combat techniques studied by dozens of species, their military academies considered the finest training grounds available. The idea that humans, those small, seemingly fragile bipeds from some backwater world, could contribute anything meaningful to military education struck him as absurd. They entered Combat Theory Classroom 7, where morning light filtered through transparent aluminum windows, illuminating rows of adaptive seating designed to accommodate the galaxy's diverse anatomical requirements. Zexhai claimed his usual spot in the back row, where his impressive height wouldn't block anyone's view, and where he could survey the entire classroom like a general reviewing troops. That's when he noticed her. Lieutenant Sarah Chun stood at the front of the classroom, reviewing notes on a holographic display. She appeared to be in her late 20s by human standards, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation military style and brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with quiet assessment. Her uniform fit properly, but did nothing to disguise the fact that she stood barely 5.5 feet tall and probably weighed less than one of Zexhai's arms. "Today, we'll be discussing asymmetric warfare tactics," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the classroom without any apparent effort. "Specifically, how smaller forces can effectively engage larger, more traditionally powerful opponents." Zexhai exchanged amused glances with Quill Tech. The irony wasn't lost on him that this diminutive human was lecturing a classroom full of species that could physically dominate her without breaking stride. Several of his classmates, including a pair of massive Thorian cadets whose rocky hide could deflect energy weapons, seemed to share his skepticism. Sarah began her presentation with historical examples from across the galaxy, detailing conflicts where technologically inferior forces had achieved victory through superior strategy, environmental advantages, and innovative tactics. Her knowledge was comprehensive, her analysis sharp, but Zexhai found himself focusing more on her physical presence than her intellectual offerings. She moved with economic precision, never wasting motion, never making unnecessary gestures. When she turned to face different sections of the classroom, her movements flowed smoothly, as if she were constantly aware of her surroundings and the position of every person within them. For some reason, this awareness irritated Zexhai more than it should have. "Lieutenant," he interrupted, his voice carrying the authority he'd inherited along with his genetic advantages. "These historical examples are interesting, but they seem somewhat theoretical. In practical terms, physical superiority, usually determines combat outcomes. Strategy can only compensate for weakness to a limited extent. Sarah paused in her presentation and looked directly at him. For a moment, Zexhai felt something he couldn't quite identify pass between them. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but something in her brown eyes suggested she was evaluating him in ways that made his scales prickle with unexpected unease. "That's an interesting perspective, Cadet Vorthak," she replied, using his name though he hadn't introduced himself. "Physical advantages are certainly significant in combat situations. However, assuming that size and strength determine outcomes can lead to dangerous overconfidence. History is full of examples where that assumption proved fatal." The subtle challenge in her tone triggered every competitive instinct Zexhai possessed. Here was this small, soft human questioning his understanding of combat dynamics, indirectly suggesting that his natural advantages might not be as decisive as he'd always assumed. The presumption rankled him like sand in sensitive joints. "Perhaps," he said, rising from his seat to emphasize his impressive height, "but in direct confrontation, superior physical capabilities tend to resolve conflicts quickly and decisively. Theoretical knowledge is valuable, but practical reality usually wins." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his statement with genuine interest rather than taking offense at the implicit challenge. "You raise an important point about direct confrontation. Would you be interested in a practical demonstration of asymmetric tactics? Sometimes experiencing concepts firsthand can be more educational than theoretical discussion." The classroom fell silent. Every cadet present understood that something significant was happening, though none of them quite grasped what. Zexhai felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him, waiting to see how he would respond to this unexpected invitation. His pride made the decision for him. "I'd be happy to participate in a demonstration, Lieutenant." Sarah smiled, and for just an instant, Zexhai caught a glimpse of something in her expression that should have warned him. It was the look of someone who had played this game before and knew exactly how it would end. After class, Sarah approached him directly, her manner friendly and professional. "Cadet Vorthak, if you're serious about that demonstration, we could arrange something practical. The Academy has excellent training facilities, and I think a hands-on lesson might benefit not just you, but other cadets who share similar perspectives." Zexhai's competitive instincts flared. The idea of backing down from a challenge, especially one issued by someone he could physically overpower without effort, went against everything his culture had taught him about strength and honor. "I'm always ready for practical education, Lieutenant." "Excellent," Sarah replied. "Meet me in Training Bay 5 after evening meal. We'll keep it simple, just basic grappling techniques. I'll show you some of the asymmetric tactics we discussed in class." As she walked away, Zexhai felt a surge of satisfaction. This would be the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the natural superiority of Calarian physical prowess while teaching this presumptuous human a lesson about respecting her betters. He could already imagine the respect in her eyes after he effortlessly dominated their demonstration. That evening, Zexhai arrived at Training Bay 5 feeling confident and slightly amused. The facility was standard Academy equipment with padded floors, safety barriers, and monitoring systems designed to prevent serious injury during practice sessions. Sarah was already there, having changed into standard training gear that somehow made her appear even smaller and more vulnerable. "Ready for your lesson in asymmetric tactics?" she asked with that same professional smile. "More than ready," Zexhai replied, stepping onto the practice mat. "Though I should warn you, Calarians are naturally strong. I'll try to be gentle." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "That's very considerate of you. Shall we begin with basic grappling? Nothing complicated, just simple strength versus technique." Zexhai nodded and moved toward her, intending to demonstrate his superiority through a straightforward display of overwhelming physical advantage. He reached out to grab her arm, planning to lift her off the ground and end the demonstration before it really began. What happened next lasted approximately half a second and redefined everything Zexhai thought he understood about combat physics and his own capabilities. Sarah moved. Not in the slow, deliberate way that most species moved, not with the careful consideration that characterized normal physical activity. She moved like liquid lightning, like a force of nature that had decided to take bipedal form for the convenience of interacting with other sentients. Zexhai's confident grab met empty air as Sarah flowed around his attack with impossible speed. Before his brain could process what was happening, she had redirected his forward momentum, applied pressure to joints he didn't know could bend in those directions, and used his own considerable mass against him in ways that violated several laws of physics. The training mat rushed up to meet his face with stunning finality. Pain exploded through his right arm as joints separated, tendons stretched beyond their design specifications, and bones shifted into configurations that his anatomy textbooks had never mentioned as possible. The sound his arm made as it dislocated was something between a crack and a wet, tearing noise that would haunt his nightmares for months. Afterward, Zexhai found himself flat on his back, staring at the training bay ceiling while his nervous system tried to process damage reports from multiple locations simultaneously. His right arm hung at an angle that definitely hadn't existed moments before, and breathing had become a challenging exercise requiring conscious effort. Sarah knelt beside him, her expression shifting from combat readiness to immediate medical concern. "Don't try to move," she said, her voice gentle but carrying absolute authority. "I need to call medical. Your shoulder joint has been completely displaced, and there might be additional damage." As she activated her communication device and began requesting emergency medical assistance, Zexhai lay motionless, trying to understand what had just occurred. One moment he had been confidently demonstrating Calarian superiority, the next moment he was studying ceiling architecture while his arm throbbed with agony that seemed to expand with each heartbeat. The medical team arrived within minutes, led by Dr. Yithmak, the Academy's senior trauma specialist. As they carefully transferred Zexhai to a medical transport, he caught Sarah's eye one final time. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I try to go easy on you." Easy on him? This devastating response that had completely dismantled his physical capabilities in less time than it took most people to think had been her going easy on him. As the medical transport carried him toward the Academy Hospital, Zexhai finally began to understand that his education about humans had been fundamentally incomplete. Learning what death worlds create the medical bays, harsh lighting, made everything appear clinical and unforgiving. Zexhai lay on a specialized treatment table, while Dr. Yithmak's four arms worked with practiced efficiency, scanning, probing, and documenting the extent of his injuries. The Xyrillian physician's expression cycled through professional concern, scientific fascination, and what appeared to be barely suppressed amusement. "Fascinating," Dr. Yithmak murmured, his secondary arms manipulating holographic displays while his primary limbs continued their examination. "I've never seen joint displacement quite this comprehensive. The precision required to cause this level of damage without triggering any of our safety protocols is remarkable." Zexhai tried to speak, but discovered that even breathing required more effort than he'd expected. The pain medication was helping, but consciousness remained an uncomfortable experience. "How bad is it?" he managed to whisper. "Medically speaking, you'll recover completely within 3 to 4 weeks, Dr. Yithmak replied. "Educationally speaking, I suspect you've learned more about human capabilities in the last hour than most cadets absorb during their entire academy experience." Before Zexhai could formulate a response, the medical bay doors slid open to admit Commander Torval, the Academy's Director of Interspecies Relations. The Valerian officer's imposing presence filled the room as his 6 eyes focused on Zexhai's prone form with an expression that suggested disappointment rather than sympathy. "Cadet Vorthak," Commander Torval said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Would you care to explain how a routine training demonstration resulted in you requiring emergency medical reconstruction?" Zexhai opened his mouth to launch into what he'd planned to be a detailed account of Lieutenant Chen's excessive response, but Dr. Yithmak interrupted by activating a holographic display above the treatment table. "Perhaps we should review the training bay footage first, Commander." I think you'll find it quite educational. The hologram flickered to life, showing a perfect overhead view of Training Bay 5. Zexhai watched himself enter the frame, moving with the swagger and confidence that now seemed embarrassingly naive. Sarah appeared small and vulnerable next to his impressive bulk, the size difference so dramatic that the outcome seemed predetermined. Then, the footage showed their brief interaction, and Zexhai experienced his humiliation from an entirely new perspective. From above, his attack looked clumsy and telegraphed, like watching a child try to catch smoke with a butterfly net. Sarah's response appeared to bend the laws of physics, her movements flowing with mechanical precision that made his own efforts seem glacially slow by comparison. The entire confrontation lasted less than 2 seconds from initial contact to his complete neutralization. Impressive, Commander Torval observed, studying the replay with professional interest. Lieutenant Chen demonstrated excellent restraint. Another species might have caused permanent damage. Restraint? Zexhai stared at the holographic replay, watching his arm bend in directions that made his current pain seem like a gentle massage. That was restraint. Oh, absolutely, Dr. Yithmak confirmed cheerfully. Based on the biomechanical analysis, Lieutenant Chen used approximately 12% of her potential force during your encounter. Any more pressure, and we'd be discussing limb replacement rather than joint reconstruction. 12%. Zexhai felt his worldview crack along fundamental lines as he processed this information. The response that had completely overwhelmed his natural advantages had been delivered with less effort than most people use to open stubborn food containers. Commander Torval manipulated the holographic controls, bringing up additional displays that showed comparative physiological data. Cadet Vorthak, what do you know about Earth's environmental classification? It's a primitive world. Zexhai replied automatically, repeating information he'd absorbed during basic xenobiology courses. Low technology, minimal industrial development, limited interstellar capability. Technologically primitive, yes, the commander agreed. But environmentally, Earth is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld. Deathworld. The term hit Zexhai like a physical blow. He'd heard references to Deathworlds during advanced survival training, usually in the context of environments so hostile that they were considered unsuitable for colonization by any rational species. Earth's environmental conditions, Commander Torval continued, have been actively trying to exterminate human life for approximately 4 million years. Predators, diseases, natural disasters, climate variations, geological instability, atmospheric fluctuations. Everything that could possibly go wrong with a planetary environment has gone wrong on Earth repeatedly throughout human evolutionary history. The holographic display shifted to show Earth's biological timeline, and Zexhai watched in growing horror as the presentation detailed mass extinctions, ice ages, volcanic cataclysms, and environmental pressures that would have eliminated any sensible species long before they developed intelligence. Humans didn't just survive this environment, the commander explained relentlessly. They became the dominant predatory species on a planet specifically designed to kill them. They developed reflexes, pattern recognition, threat assessment capabilities, and combat instincts that allowed them to hunt and defeat creatures that were specifically evolved to hunt and defeat them. The medical bay doors opened again, and Sarah Chen entered quietly, her expression showing genuine concern. "How is he doing, Doctor?" "Physically, he'll make a full recovery," Dr. Yithmak replied. "Psychologically, I think he's beginning to understand some fundamental truths about human capabilities that weren't covered in his xenobiology courses." Sarah approached Zexhai's treatment table with the same careful awareness he'd noticed during their classroom encounter. Up close, he could see details he'd missed before. Her movements weren't just economical, they were predatory. Every step, every gesture, every shift in posture suggested someone who was constantly evaluating her environment for potential threats and escape routes. "I'm sorry about your arm," she said quietly. "I tried to minimize the damage, but you moved faster than I expected. I had to react on instinct." "Instinct," Zexhai repeated numbly. "Human combat reflexes are largely automatic," Commander Torval explained. Millions of years of survival programming that activates when they perceive threats. From Lieutenant Chen's perspective, your grab registered as a potential attack pattern requiring immediate neutralization. Sarah nodded. When someone reaches for me unexpectedly, especially someone significantly larger, my brain runs a threat assessment and responds accordingly. I don't really think about it consciously. It's like breathing or blinking. Zexhai stared at her, trying to reconcile the quiet professional instructor with the combat specialist who had dismantled his physical capabilities without apparent effort. How many other species could do what you did? None. Commander Torval answered before Sarah could respond. Humans are unique among known sapient species. Their environmental conditions created evolutionary advantages that exceed galactic norms by significant margins. Dr. Yithmak pulled up additional comparative data showing human physical statistics alongside those of other species. Reaction times, muscle density, bone strength, cardiovascular efficiency, neural processing speed. In every category, humans registered performance levels that seem designed to embarrass other sapient life forms. We're not trying to be superior, Sarah said gently, apparently sensing Zexhai's growing distress. We're just adapted for the environment we evolved in. Most species developed intelligence and cooperation without needing to become living weapons. You should be proud of that. But you are living weapons, Zexhai said, the words coming out as half question, half statement. Sarah considered this seriously. In some ways, yes. Earth taught us to fight, hunt, and survive in conditions that would eliminate most species. But it also taught us to cooperate, protect each other, and solve problems creatively. We're not just weapons, we're also healers, teachers, and builders. Over the following days, as Zexhai's arm slowly healed under Dr. Yithmak's expert care, he received an intensive education about human capabilities that no academy course had ever provided. Sarah visited daily, partly to monitor his recovery, and partly to help him understand what had happened during their encounter. She brought additional materials, historical records, and scientific data about human evolution and capabilities. Zexhai learned about persistence hunting, where early humans would chase prey animals for days until they collapsed from exhaustion. He discovered that human endurance capabilities exceeded those of most mechanized vehicles. He found out that human pattern recognition and tactical thinking had been developed through millions of years of warfare against environment, predators, and each other. The thing that most people don't understand about humans, Sarah explained during one of their sessions, is that we're not naturally aggressive. We're naturally defensive. Everything we can do, we developed because our world was trying to kill us. We learned to fight because fighting was the only way to survive. But you're so small, Zexhai protested, still struggling to reconcile Sarah's physical appearance with her devastating capabilities. Size is often a disadvantage on a death world, she replied. Large creatures require more resources, present bigger targets, and move more slowly than smaller ones. Humans evolved to be efficient rather than impressive. As his understanding grew, Zexhai's perspective on the entire galactic community began to shift. He realized that most species, including his own, had developed in environments that were relatively safe and stable. They'd achieved sapience through cooperation and technological advancement, not through constant warfare with hostile environments. Humans were unique. They were the only known species that had achieved intelligence while simultaneously becoming perfect predators adapted for one of the most dangerous environments in known space. Why don't other species understand this? He asked during one of their conversations. Because it's not immediately obvious, Sarah replied. We don't look dangerous by galactic standards. We're smaller than most species, we don't have natural weapons like claws or scales, and we tend to be friendly and cooperative in social situations. People see us as harmless until they discover otherwise. Like I did. Like you did, she agreed with a slight smile. But you're not the first, and you probably won't be the last. Most species go through some version of this learning curve when they first encounter humans. By the end of his second week in medical care, Zexhai had absorbed more practical education about interspecies relations than he'd gained during his entire previous academy experience. When Dr. Yithmak finally cleared him for return to regular activities, he felt like a completely different person than the overconfident cadet who had challenged Sarah to a demonstration, but his education was far from complete. From Predator to Protector 3 weeks after his discharge from the medical bay, Zexhai stood in the Academy's advanced training complex, watching something that redefined his understanding of physical possibility. Through reinforced observation windows, he observed Lieutenant Sarah Chun conducting a combat demonstration for senior cadets, and the display of human capabilities made his previous encounter seem like a gentle introduction to a much larger reality. Sarah moved through a series of opponents with fluid grace that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Each engagement lasted seconds, with her adversaries finding themselves neutralized before they fully understood what was happening. She fought multiple opponents simultaneously, using their size and strength against them while maintaining perfect control over the level of force applied. Remarkable, isn't it? Dr. Yithmak commented, joining Zexhai at the observation window. Lieutenant Chun has been working with our medical team to develop training protocols that challenge human capabilities without causing excessive injury to their partners. Zexhai watched Sarah disable 3 opponents in rapid succession, her movements flowing like water around stone. She's not even breathing hard, he observed. Humans call this light exercise, the doctor replied with amusement. Their cardiovascular systems are designed for sustained activity that would exhaust most species within minutes. Lieutenant Chun could maintain this level of performance for several hours if necessary. The demonstration concluded with Sarah helping her training partners to their feet, checking for injuries, and offering constructive feedback on their techniques. Her transition from devastating combat specialist to concerned instructor happened so seamlessly that it seemed like watching 2 different people inhabit the same body. Cadet Vorthak, Commander Torval's voice carried across the training complex as he approached with his characteristic measured stride. How are you feeling about returning to active training? Different. Zexhai replied honestly. I'm not sure I understand my place in this environment anymore. The commander nodded approvingly. Self-awareness is the beginning of true education. Your encounter with Lieutenant Chun has given you insights that most cadets never achieve. The question is what you'll do with that knowledge. Over the following days, Zexhai threw himself into his studies with renewed intensity. He researched human history, studied their military tactics, and tried to understand how a species that appeared so vulnerable had become such formidable warriors. The more he learned, the more his respect for humanity grew. Humans hadn't just survived their hostile environment, they'd learned to thrive in it. They developed technologies, social structures, and philosophical frameworks that allowed them to cooperate on a scale that exceeded most galactic civilizations. Their military organizations combined individual combat excellence with group coordination that multiplied their effectiveness exponentially. But perhaps most importantly, they'd learned to apply their capabilities with precision and restraint. Sarah's response to his challenge had been exactly calibrated to neutralize his threat without causing permanent damage. She could have killed him easily, but she'd chosen to educate him instead. This realization led to a deeper understanding of what humans brought to the galactic community. They weren't just formidable warriors, they were natural protectors. Their evolution had taught them to defend not just themselves, but their entire social group. When humans joined military organizations, they brought this protective instinct with them. One evening, while studying in the Academy Library, Zexhai witnessed an incident that crystallized his new understanding. Rithkor, a hulking Drakarian cadet known for his aggressive behavior, cornered Piptel, a small Aquarian student, near the research terminals. The size difference was dramatic, with Rithkor standing nearly 8 feet tall, while Piptel barely reached 4 feet. Little fish needs to learn some respect, Rithkor growled, using his massive bulk to intimidate the smaller cadet. Maybe some time in the waste recycling systems would teach proper behavior. Zexhai recognized the dynamic immediately. It was exactly the same situation he created with Sarah, right down to the overconfident bully using size and strength to intimidate someone who appeared vulnerable. The difference was that Piptel actually was vulnerable, lacking both the training and the evolutionary advantages to defend himself. For a moment, Zexhai hesitated. His old instincts told him to avoid involvement, to let the situation resolve itself naturally according to the Academy's social hierarchy. But his new understanding of power and responsibility made that approach impossible. Rithkor, he called out, standing from his study station. Is there a problem here? The Dracarian turned toward him with obvious irritation. No problem, Calarian. Just teaching some manners to creatures that forget their place. Their place, Zexhai repeated, moving closer to the confrontation. And where exactly do you think their place should be? Rithkor's expression shifted to confusion, then anger. Below their betters. Same as always. I used to think that way, Zexhai replied quietly. Then I learned that assuming superiority based on physical advantages can lead to educational experiences you'd rather avoid. He gestured to his right arm, which still showed slight discoloration from his encounter with Sarah. Would you like to hear about my recent lesson in respecting others regardless of their apparent limitations? Rithkor's aggressive posture wavered as he processed the implications of Zexhai's words. Stories of the Calarian cadets' humiliating defeat at the hands of a human instructor had circulated throughout the academy, becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating other species. This doesn't concern you, Rithkor muttered, but his intimidation of Piptel ceased immediately. Actually, it does, Zexhai replied, stepping between the larger cadet and his intended victim. Creating hostile environments for our classmates concerns all of us. We're here to learn cooperation and mutual respect, not to establish dominance hierarchies based on physical characteristics. The confrontation might have escalated, but Lieutenant Sarah Chin chose that moment to enter the library. Her presence changed the entire dynamic instantly. Rithkor's aggressive posture evaporated as he recognized someone whose reputation for swift and decisive responses to bullying behavior was well established throughout the academy. Gentlemen, Sarah said pleasantly, her voice carrying clearly across the library space. Is everything all right here? Everything's fine, Lieutenant, Zexhai replied quickly. Rithkor was just leaving. The Dracarian cadet nodded rapidly and departed without another word, leaving Piptel visibly relieved and grateful. Sarah approached Zexhai with an expression of approval. That was well handled. You've learned something important about using strength to protect rather than intimidate. I learned it from an excellent teacher, Zexhai replied. Though the lesson was more painful than I'd anticipated, Sarah laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both genuinely amused and slightly predatory. The best lessons usually are. Pain has a way of making concepts memorable. Over the remainder of their academy training, Zexhai found his relationship with Sarah evolving from student and instructor to colleagues and friends. She helped him understand not just human capabilities, but human perspectives on cooperation, protection, and the responsible use of power. He learned that humans didn't seek dominance for its own sake. Their evolutionary history had taught them that survival depended on group cooperation and mutual protection. When they demonstrated superior capabilities, it was typically in service of defending others rather than establishing personal superiority. This understanding transformed Zexhai's approach to leadership and military service. Instead of viewing his natural advantages as tools for establishing dominance, he began to see them as responsibilities for protecting those who lacked his capabilities. The Academy took notice of his transformation. Commander Torval assigned him to leadership positions where his size and strength could be used to maintain order and protect smaller cadets from intimidation. His encounter with Sarah became a case study in the Academy's interspecies relations courses, illustrating both the dangers of assumptions and the potential for personal growth through difficult experiences. That on graduation day, Zexhai stood among his classmates as they received their assignments to various military units throughout the galaxy. When his name was called, he learned that he'd been assigned to the same Deep Space Patrol unit as Lieutenant Sarah Chun, now promoted to captain. Looking forward to working with you again, Sarah said as they reviewed their deployment orders. Likewise, Zexhai replied, "Though I promise not to grab your arm without permission this time." Sarah grinned, and for a moment he caught that glimpse of predatory awareness that had become familiar over their months of friendship. "I appreciate that. My restraint has improved significantly since our first encounter, but I'd rather not test it unnecessarily." As their transport prepared for departure to their new assignment, Zexhai reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. What had begun as arrogant assumptions about human limitations had evolved into deep respect for their capabilities and genuine friendship with one of their representatives. He'd learned that true strength wasn't about dominating others, but about protecting them. He discovered that appearances could be deceiving in ways that went far beyond simple physical characteristics. Most importantly, he'd understood that the galaxy was full of species with unique advantages and perspectives, and that cooperation was always more valuable than domination. His right arm still ached occasionally, especially during atmospheric pressure changes. Dr. Yithmak had warned him that the joint would never be quite the same, that he'd always carry a physical reminder of his encounter with human defensive reflexes. Zexhai considered this a small price to pay for the education he'd received. Every time his arm reminded him of that day in Training Bay 5, he remembered the importance of treating others with respect regardless of their apparent limitations. After all, as he'd learned through painful personal experience, assumptions about superiority could lead to educational encounters that were both memorable and humbling. And in a galaxy full of diverse species with hidden capabilities, humility was a far more valuable trait than arrogance, the end